Before we journey into the shadowed corridors of medieval monasteries, I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from tonight. Whether you're settling in for sleep in Manchester, beginning your evening windowing in Melbourne, or finding a quiet moment somewhere between, I'm grateful you've joined me here. If these explorations into history's more unsettling truths resonate with you, please subscribe so you never miss our descent into the past's darkest corners. Now, settle back and let your mind drift with me to a time when faith and fear walked hand in hand, when the promise of salvation came shadowed by the threat of damnation. The ridge is the colour of warm ash, and the moon is a thin bowl tipped gently toward the Nile. Hecanifer, a new archer with sleep still gathering in his lashes, follows his teacher's footprints. Not on top, never on the skyline, but along the shadowed shoulder where the desert keeps secrets. Master Tamek says nothing at first. He lets the wind speak, sifting the slope, combing the acacia thorns, making a sound like someone turning pages. "We train by moonlight," he finally murmurs, "because the night is honest. In the day, a man believes the world is large. At night, he knows it is near. His breath, his string, the fibre that binds arrow to thought." Asher the Fletcher kneels beside a basket of ostrich-feather fletchings and date palm shafts. She hums a slow tune whose notes seem to land on the sand and rest there. The boys watch the feathers soft tremble when wind shifts. "That," Tamek says, "is your flag." He doesn't point. He folds his hands and waits. "Why the ridge?" Hecanifer asks, whispering, because the moon seems to prefer that. "Because shadows lean downhill," Asher answers, "and a shadow can swallow a heartbeat." Tamek nods. "And because the ridge teaches restraint. The sky tempts you to stand tall, but the archer who loves sleep more than boasting lives long enough to see many moons." They practice drawing without loosing, counting heartbeats. One for grip, one for breath, one for release they do not yet take. The quivers, hippo-hide dark, lie like sleeping animals at their feet. Hecanifer learns that the desert notices hurry, and that the moon keeps an eye on those who don't. By the end, his shoulders have found a quieter angle. "Tomorrow," Tamek says, smiling, "we will learn to hear distance." Beck the bowyer speaks slowly, as if each word needs to be warmed by the coals before it can travel. In a sheltered hollow, he tends a small clay hearth where acacia resin melts into a fragrant amber. Strips of horn, wood, and sinew wait like quiet guests around a bowl of water. "You don't build a bow," he tells Hecanifer. "You invite it." The young archer leans closer, drawing the faint perfume of smoke and sap into memory. "Night means gentle heat," Beck explains. "The glue cures without the day's fierce hand, and the joint learns the moon's patience." He shows the spine of the bow, how it curves away from haste. The horn will face the archer, the sinew will face the sky. Between them, wood that remembers trees swaying at the riverbank. Each layer laid not with force, but with listening. "If you hurry resin," Beck says, "it sulks. If you court it, it holds." He winds linen bands to cradle the lamination, wiping away what squeezes out, humming in a long descending line that seems to lengthen time. Asher brings feathers, laughing softly. Even the glue wants lullabies. Tamek arrives, not to supervise, but to warm his hands over the hearth and tell a small story about the first bow that snapped in pride and came back in humility as two walking sticks. The boys smile, because pride and walking sticks are a pair that makes sense. Hekanafa touches the unfinished bow and feels that it is already correcting him, asking him to wait, to watch, to stop counting and learn to measure by scent and by shine. Above, the moon slides a finger over the ridge and tests the curve herself. In the hush, Beck adds one more thread of sinew, just enough. "We train at night," he says, "so our tools remember the same lesson." Tamek leads the novices along the ridge's lee, a path that feels like the back of a sleeping cat. "Remember," he says, "the horizon is a gossip. Stand on it, and the whole valley knows your name." He indicates a boulder no higher than a knee. This is a palace for the cautious. They crouch, using stone lips to break their shapes, coiling their shadows into the folds of the slope. The night is so gentle that even the scorpions seem unhurried. Hekanafa imagines the ridge as a long ear, listening for careless boots. He experiments with foot placement, heel to soft sand, toe to firmer crust, until the sound becomes something the wind accepts. Asher measures each boy against the sky, thumb raised, checking whether hair or hope sticks up into the pail. "Closer," she whispers, and they lower another hand's breadth. Tamek explains that the ridge is a teacher of two tongues. It speaks geography and character. Geography, because the lee side breaks the breeze, keeps scent pulled low, and carries whispers downhill. Character, because pride lifts and patience folds. "Moonlight is fair to all," he says. "It offers no shade to favorites. Only practice becomes shelter." They practice silhouettes. One archer kneels, another stands behind, a third lies prone, each leaving the sky untouched. The lesson is odd and satisfying. How to be present without being announced. Hekanafa feels the steadying of his ribs as the ridge's geometry becomes a sort of lullaby. He threads an arrow and does not loose it, letting the shaft rest like a quiet question across his bow hand. Somewhere below, a jackal calls, the sound curving like a drawn string. The boys smile. Even the animals keep a moonlit schedule. "Again," Tamek says, not sternly, but the way a river says it to stones. Tamek seats them facing the silver strip of the Nile. "The river is older than your hurry," he says, half smiling. He shows them the old pattern. Draw on the quiet inhale. Settle on the pause when breath is neither coming nor going. Release on the exhale that feels almost like surrender. Day makes us hoard breath. Night teaches us to give it away and be given back. His voice is the sort that makes a person unconsciously match its cadence. Asher hands Hekanafa a reed whistle. "Not to blow," she says, "to hear." When he places it at his lips and breathes through without sound, the reed becomes a teacher of airflow. Too much and it might sing, too little and it complains with a hiss. "Some nights," Tamek adds, "we string bows that never throw." We practice letting the arrow go with nothing on the string, but patience. They time themselves by the little star cluster that rides near the moon, counting heartbeats that settle like silt. "If you breathe like a startled fish," Tamek chuckles, "the target swims away even when it's a post in the sand." The boys laugh softly and try again, this time with shoulders easing down, mouths barely open. Hekanafa feels the sight world soften. The target stands firm, the bow grows lighter, and the night seems to hold the arrow before he does. In a pause between practice draws, the breeze lifts the ostrich feathers in the basket, and the group inhales together as if the fletchings were lungs. "There," Asher says, "you heard it." The moon adds her slow consent, floating just above the ridge edge, not a witness so much as a partner in the breathing. They gather around Asher's mat where feathers lie in careful rows, pale cream, warm grey, and one strange ribboned plume that looks like a road on a map. Each feather knows a kind of wind, she says, passing them slowly, letting each student feel the spine's spring. Ostrich gives forgiveness. It forgives a hurried release, a shy draw, a gust that changes its mind. She trims the quills to brother lengths, sets them in groups of 3, and shows the slip of sinew thread, the dot of resin, the neat spiral tie. Moonlight is kind to edges, she explains. Under this light, you see pure shape. No colour to distract. The feather tells you if it sits straight, and the wind tells you if it sits true. Tamek picks up a bundle and shakes it gently. The sound is like small rain on a palm roof. Hikanefa tries binding his first set, discovering that steady fingers are a kind of courtesy he can extend to materials. Asher corrects one angle by less than a grain of sand. Listen, she says, and turns the arrow in the breeze. A faint, reassuring hum. A good arrow sings before it flies. They line finished shafts in the sand, fletchings glimmering like small sails anchored at a beach. The wind leans. The feathers answer, some with a quiet flutter, some not at all. There, Asher nods. The silent ones will fly nearest to your wish. Hekanefa smiles, because he is old enough to know wishes can be unruly, and young enough to believe feathers might understand them. The moon lingers, approving the neat lines, and the ridge keeps their work in its memory. A soft ledger, written in tracks and trimmed quills. The ridge's flank is a book with 2 kinds of pages, crust and sift. Tamek demonstrates how the crust carries sound farther, but leaves fewer prints, while the sift swallows sound, but writes everything down. Choose your witness, he says. At night, we prefer an honest friend we can erase. He shows the heel-to-ball glide, the angle that distributes weight as if apologizing to the ground. They practice on a lane Asher prepares with a palm brush, smoothen the top layer so every misstep will tell the story of its own eagerness. Hekanefa discovers that ankles are authors, knees editors, hips publishers. The boys laugh softly at this, and the sand, pleased, grows more cooperative. A slow step leaves nothing but the faintest crescent. A hurried one prints like a shout. Tamek kneels and draws little stars around the best impressions. Not to praise, he murmurs, to help the foot remember its own handwriting. They learn to place a foot where a small rock breaks the crust, to use the shadow of a thorn for cover, to let cloaks drift just above the surface so fabric erases the last syllable of each step. Hekanefa's shyness becomes an asset. He moves, as if entering a room where someone sleeps. When they reach the ridge's low saddle, the night breeze takes a breath, and their footprints pause with it, becoming a dotted line the wind will finish by morning. Tamek's smile is nothing more than a softening around the eyes. Good, he says. Now your feet can speak softly, even when your heart is loud. On a flat rock warmed by yesterday, Tamek draws a circle with a reed and a pinch of ash. We train most when the moon is young and thoughtful, he says, shading a crescent. Not so bright we throw long shadows. Not so dark we become our own obstacles. He marks flood time, planting time, and travel time on the circle's edge. Archers must know the river's moods because caravans and boats prefer different moons. Asher adds small dots near the crescent's points. These nights, favor fletching and glue, she explains. Cool enough for curing, warm enough for patience. Beck the bowyer, invited by a hand wave, taps the circle at its belly full moon. These, he says, are for stories and repairs. Too bright for stealth, perfect for remembering. Hekanafa studies the ash circle until it looks like a pale drum. He notices how training flows with the river's height, how practice shifts uphill when marsh gnats wake, how the ridge belongs to archers the way a quiet courtyard belongs to potters at dawn. The moon becomes less a lamp and more a partner whose schedule Tamek respects. They speak of festivals and patrols, of nights when the Queen's messenger might arrive with sealed instructions, and of others when the only assignment is listening for wind among the acacias. Why moonlight? Hekanafa asks one more time, and Tamek's answer is gentle. Because the moon teaches enough light to act, and enough darkness to be kind. The ash circle smudges under a fingertip, becoming a river bend. Hekanafa smiles. Calendars and water are cousins. Above, the real moon continues her slow appointment with the ridge, neither early nor late, elegant as a lesson. A row of clay pots waits at ankle height, each with a reed tuft tucked inside like an old man's hair. Pots don't argue, Tamek says. They either forgive you or they don't. He sets them unevenly along the slope, some in shallow depressions, some on tiny hummocks. The desert rarely gives you fair ground. Asha demonstrates a low draw so the arrow slips over the dune lip without waking the skyline. The first pot receives her shaft with a soft chuff, reed tuft shivering as if it heard a joke. The students release in turn, aiming not to break pottery, Beck would grieve, but to comb the reeds. We practice precision, not destruction, Tamek reminds them. A pot that survives becomes wiser. Hekanafa's first arrow kisses the rim and rests there, a polite visitor. The second parts the reed and settles in the sand just beyond. Tamek nods. Good manners. They laugh quietly, because there is relief in targets that only whisper. Hekanafa notices how his hearing sharpens. He can tell a near miss by the reed's tremble. He can hear the difference between a pot on packed sand and one on sift. They reset pots, turn them a little, and practice again. The moon seems to lean closer, interested in this careful gardening of aim. By the end, a small grove of reeds has been combed into neatness, and only one pot has cracked. By its own decision, everyone agrees. Beck sighs, then smiles and pockets the shard. It will make a fine scraper. In the hollow where tools sleep, Beck lays out hippo-hide strips, sun-cured and rubbed with oil until they shine like river stones. A quiver should behave like a patient friend, he says, soft enough to forgive, firm enough to stand. He shows how the mouth flares so fingers find fletchings without fishing, how the base tucks into the belt to keep arrows from gossiping. Asha threads palm fiber cords through copper rings. She explains that the cords must not creak. At night, even pride has a sound, and she dusts them with powdered clay to quiet them further. Hekanafa learns to test the draw from quiver to bow. 2 fingers, a twist to find the cock feather, a lift smooth enough that the other arrows hardly notice movement. They practice walking with quivers full, then nearly empty. How the balance changes, and how the body compensates. Tamek has them kneel, roll a little, stand, and draw in one slow wave, a tide motion. We are not acrobats, he says, chuckling. We are tides. Tides do not hurry, and yet they reach everything. When the quiver finally rests at Hekanafa's side, It seems to belong there the way a thought belongs just before sleep, present, available, quiet as a shared secret. He tests it in the breeze. The feathers barely murmur. Asher nods, satisfied. You are ready to learn turning. Tamek draws 4 small star signs on the sand, points of Orion's ancient memory, a curl that belongs to a scorpion, a little boat of lights that everyone calls by their own village name. Our bodies love to declare themselves when they turn, he says. We will learn to turn as if continuing a thought. He places Hakanafa at the center and has him practice quarter turns guided by stars. Feet remain whispering to the ground. Hips pivot like a door on oiled leather. Shoulders follow a heartbeat later, head last, bow hand already a fraction ahead of attention. If your head hurries, Asher adds, your feet gossip. The boys grin and try again, softer. They layer in the quiver. Turn, find arrow, notch without looking. Notice the cock feather by feel. Raise without raising your silhouette. All the while, the stars approve, their chill steadiness inviting imitation. Tamek instructs them to breathe on the exhale as the turn completes, so any accidental sound rides a falling breath and disappears into the slope. Hakanafa discovers that turning without announcing feels like remembering a name rather than calling it. He uses the little boat of stars as his timing bell. When the bow aligns with its prow, his breath leaves, and the notch is already a fact. Tamek nods once. That is plenty. They end by facing the Nile again, each student a quiet compass, with the river at north and the ridge at south. In daylight, Tamek says, people will think you learn to shoot. At night, you learn to move. Near the training ridge, a charcoal pit glows like a hidden heart. Beck introduces them to the iron that will become arrowheads, small blanks, dull as pebbles now, destined for neat geometries. Meroë's breath is long, he says, tending the bellows with a slow rhythm. Blow too fast and the metal grows brittle. Blow too slow and it falls asleep. He shows how iron listens to moonlight just as glue does. Not literally, of course. It listens to steady temperature, to hands that do not hurry, to quenching water carried from the Nile at dusk, so it is neither day hot nor night cold. Asher holds the tongs, while Beck shapes a leaf point and a bodkin, explaining that some nights prefer one and some the other. Wind, distance, and target deciding with the moon. Hakanafa files a rough edge, learning that sharpening is less violence than coaxing. Thin burrs lifted and laid down again until the edge is honest. He tests it with a reed, slicing cleanly without tearing. A good edge is humble, Beck murmurs. It does not announce itself on the way to work. The arrowheads cool on a flat stone, their dark surfaces catching silver. Across the ridge, the training pots sit like quiet witnesses, and Hakanafa imagines the path from awe to breath to flight. A patient lineage. Tomorrow they will bind heads to shafts, but tonight belongs to fire's lullaby, the bellows going in and out like someone falling asleep. Noise is a language, Tamek begins, but silence has grammar. He hands each student a palm leaf strip cut into 3 widths. By moonlight, he demonstrates how raised shadows mean halt, crossed shadows mean left, and a small wave means gather, signals that even a cautious jackal might miss. Asher introduces throat whistles so soft they ride under wind. 1 note to hold, 2 to drift, 3 to return. You will never use all of these at once. She smiles. The desert dislikes chatter. They drift across the ridge in pairs, practicing shadow speech. Hakanafa learns that his hands must speak slower than his thoughts, or the group will rush. He discovers how to place himself where his shadow can be seen by the next archer, but not by the sky, and how to let a raised finger become a bridge rather than a command. A test follows. Beck places a reed mat at the far end with a tiny clay bell beneath. The group must reach it and lift the mat without a chime. They move like a sentence written cautiously, punctuation in the right places. Twice, a loose stone threatens to interrupt. Twice, a palm shadow wave smooths the stumble. When Hakanafa finally slides fingers under the mat and raises it, the bell remains untroubled. He feels the same quiet pride as when a good arrow sings. Tamek's approval is a nod. "You speak the night," he says, and the night answers. A clay jar stands half buried at the base of the ridge. Tamek tosses a handful of pebbles into it, one at a time, from different ranges and angles. Each clink is a syllable in a language the desert speaks fluently. "Distance wears a different cloak at night," he says. "It either borrows your breath or returns it." He shows how a sound close at hand steals a bit of your inhale, while a far sound seems to happen just beyond your ribs. They take turns facing away, measuring with ears alone as pebbles drop, as a reed tuft shivers, as Asher brushes a cloak over sand. Hakanafa discovers that he can feel the jar's size in the echo, the ridge's curve in the delay, the moon's angle in how high a sound seems to sit. A real jackal offers extra credit with a call that steps down the slope like a careful messenger. "Why moonlight?" Tamek repeats the question with a shrug. "Because sight rests a little, and hearing wakes politely." He asks Hakanafa to loose an arrow on sound. A reed rustle from the left, a pebble clink from low right, and a soft exhale straight ahead. Hakanafa chooses the rustle and sends an arrow to comb its tuft. The quiver accepts the empty space without complaint. They end by sitting quietly, counting the far boats by their oars' whisper, and naming the winds by which edge of the ear they touch. The lesson feels like a story told mostly between the lines. From the river path, a rider approaches at a walk, as if reluctant to disturb sleep. His cloak is dusted with moon and travel. He is Meroë, a messenger with a seal of the Kandake, Queen's authority pressed into clay. He brings no threat, only curiosity wrapped as an errand. "The Kandake asks," he says, smiling, "why your ridge loves the moon." Tamek bows with a nod that is nearly a joke. "Because she keeps us from lying to ourselves," he replies. The messenger laughs, then unrolls a palm strip with a drawing, a narrow pass, 2 clay pots, a rope, and a reed bell. "Carry the rope between you without waking the bell. Meet me at the pass before the last star fades." The group sets out, pairs cradling the rope as if it were a sleeping child. Hakanafa feels the test is not about speed, but about the kindness of movement. Where the sand dips, they lower. Where the ridge belly rises, they raise. At the narrowest point, Asher's palm shadow steadies them. The bell sleeps on. They arrive early because they never hurried. Meroë nods at the untouched reed. "The Kandake likes answers that sound like this," he says, and offers a basket of dates. The sweetness tastes like relief. He stays long enough to watch one round of pot combing and leaves with the moon, promising to tell a story about a ridge that never raises its voice. Beck produces a bundle of blunt-nosed shafts, training arrows that kiss, not cut. "We teach bones with kindness," he says. Tamek arranges a course where arrows must travel, nudge a target, and return by slope alone, sliding back into a shallow trench as if homesick. The boys chuckle at the notion of arrows with manners. Hecanifer learns to aim not at the pot, but at the idea of return, angle, force, and the ridge's tilt doing the arithmetic for him. His first attempt stops short. His second, brighter with learning, nudges the pot's reed and backs away, coy. The trench accepts it. Asher claps once, softly. They compete in the most polite way possible, whose arrow can greet 3 pots and come back with the most elegant apology. The desert approves of this game. It feels like a secret pact between gravity as grace. Tamek remarks that warriors trained like this sleep better than those who know only breaking. No one argues. Even the pots seem relieved. By night's end, their quivers are full again, and the ridge too has kept its agreement. Things sent out can return unharmed if invited properly. A woven tray of dates circulates, Meroë's leftover kindness. Tamek tells them to savor, not eat quickly. Each pit will become a measure, he says, placing one between finger and thumb. He shows how to hold it at arm's length and compare its width to a pot's apparent size on the slope. If the pot hides behind half a pit, you will need a certain bend of bow, if 1/3, another. Asher laughs at the elegance of it. Eat your math, she says. They calibrate by trial, pit against pot, arrow speed against slope, memory against moon. Hecanifer discovers that he can taste the distance as well as see it, the sweetness lingering as a number his body understands. The exercise becomes a lullaby of repetitions. Pit, measure, draw, release, listen. No one speaks of victory. They speak of consistency, of making the same kindness to distance again and again, until distance recognizes you and waves you through. The ridge approves of such diplomacy. By the time the tray is empty, their pockets jingle with smooth seeds, and the pots stand combed and content. Tamek remarks that these pits will live 2 lives, first as sweetness, then as guides. Things that serve twice, he says, learn wisdom. A row of tiny lamps glows along a stone shelf. Lotus oil in small clay bowls, with wicks twisted from linen scraps. Light that refuses to shout, Asher says. Tonight's lesson is care. String waxing, knock smoothing, and bowback rubbing with a stone smoothed by the Nile itself. Moon and lamplight cooperate. 1 silver, 1 honey. Hecanifer learns the feel of a string that has forgiven itself after work. Slightly tacky from wax, willing to sing without buzzing. He polishes his knocks until the arrow settles with a quiet click, not a clatter. Beck sharpens a bodkin in a shallow pan to catch filings so they won't trouble bare feet tomorrow. Tamek tells a soft story about a moon that forgot herself and rose late, and how the archers waited, playing a game of who could breathe the slowest. Hecanifer wins tonight's version by accident. He was too absorbed in the knocks fit to hurry air. Compliments here sound like observations. Your arrow sits, Asher says simply, and it is praise enough. Morning will erase, but night records. Tamek takes them to a section where old prints rest like faded script. We read, he says, not to hunt, but to understand how the ridge keeps stories. They follow the tale of a fox who tested the wind, a beetle that rolled a treasure across a miniature dune, a heavy sandal that learned to lighten as it climbed. Hecanifer feels compassion for that sandal. He knows what it is to be new. Asher points out where a cloak brushed, smoothing too much. This one tried to erase, she notes, and in doing so, underlined. They laugh and promise to remember. The exercise is not about judgment, but about kinship with movement, the way all living things negotiate slope and shadow. Tamik has them overlay their steps beside the old ones, matching not length, but intention. Hekanifa steps where the fox hesitated and learns what made the pause, an unexpected hollowness beneath crust. He bows slightly, in thanks to an animal teacher who never knew him. "Why moonlight?" Tamik asks the air, then answers himself, "Because it allows mercy. We can see enough to learn without the sharpness that makes us harsh." The ridge, pleased, lets a cool thread of breeze move across their ankles like a benediction. At the training ground's edge, a small incense cone curls smoke that smells of frankincense and acacia. Tamik invites each student to step forward, touch resin to wrist, and speak a vow the ridge will hear. Not a war oath, a courtesy. Hekanifa's voice is barely a thread. "I will never stand on the skyline," he promises, "and I will always count my breath before my pride." Asher places a palm over each vow and presses, sealing it like a letter. Beck adds his in practical terms, "I will repair what I bend." The incense braids with moonlight in the hush, and the night seems to accept their offerings as if they were small anchors holding sleep in place. They share water, pass a bowl of dried figs, and sit shoulder to shoulder. The quiet is a friend who knows when not to speak. "We train at night," Tamik says softly, "because vows whispered under stars are easier to keep in the day." For the final lesson of this night, Tamik arranges all the teachings into one silver thread. Pots at mixed distances, reed tufts as judges, a rope to carry briefly, a narrow pass, a bell that prefers dreams to ringing. "Move as if you are remembering a story you love," he says. They begin at the ridge shadow, feet choosing friends among crust and sift. Date pits measure, feathers whisper, breath matches the river's slow heart. Turns occur as if thoughts were simply adjusting their angle. Asher's palm shadow speaks once, hold, and the group holds. Hekanifa's arrow hums before it flies, a small song that ends with a reed combed so neatly it looks combed by rain. They carry the rope past the bell. It does not wake. Beck watches, delighted by tools that behave as if grateful. When they gather at the last pot, Tamik asks no one for score. He asks how the moon felt on the back of their hands. Hekanifa says, "Like a teacher who never raised her voice." The ridge stores this answer with all the others, the footprints, the smudged calendar, the laugh that came when a pot forgave a near miss. And the moon, patient, slides a finger along the bowbacks as if turning a page. They pack quietly, quivers full, hearts unhurried. "Why moonlight?" Tamik repeats, almost to himself, and then gives the simplest answer yet. "Because we leave the night, gentler than we found it. The ridge becomes an observatory without walls." Tamik draws no lines tonight. He lets the sky do the talking. "You don't need to know every name," he says. "Only the ones that love your path." He points to a crooked cluster near the horizon, the little boat that navigates Hekanifa's turning drill, and to a bright companion star that rises when the wind usually rests. "When this one lifts," Asher adds, "feathers behave like good listeners." They lie on their backs first, bows set aside, and learn the sky as a ceiling they might someday paint. Tamik teaches the slow grammar of rising and setting, how the stars pour west like sand spilling from a tilted jar, how a bright marker near the river becomes their quiet bell for ending practice. Beck, unexpectedly gentle, tells of a time he shaped a bow to the curve between two stars, and how it became a kind bow because it remembered that curve long after sunrise. Hecanefer practices timing draws with stellar beats. Notch when the little boat meets the acacia branch. Settle when the crooked cluster clears a stone. Release on the exhale as the bright companion leaves the ridge's ear. It feels like borrowing steadiness from something that cannot hurry. The boys learn that if a star keeps time, they can lend their breath to it and get it back calmer. When they finally sit, Tamek asks for a star each boy will carry as a pocket clock. Hecanefer chooses the bright companion, the one that rises with quiet air, and promises to greet it with the softest string song he knows. That, Tamek smiles, is a friendship. Though night rules, Tamek wants them to understand day's tricks so they can trust Moonlight more. He shows them a hollow where heat often scribbles mirages by afternoon. A mirage is the desert telling a joke, he says. Laugh, don't answer. At night the hollow is honest, edges are edges, lines are lines. They memorize the true shapes now, so later, when day wobbles them, memory will whisper correction. Asha sets 3 reeds in a chevron. She has them study the spacing by moon. Then she shuffles them just a finger's width. Even in low light, their eyes catch the difference because they are moving slowly enough for small truth to arrive. Hecanefer learns that the best way to see at night is to look beside the thing, letting the corners of the eye read the world like a soft script. Side-seeing, Tamek calls it. The moon likes to be noticed politely. They rehearse, choosing not to shoot when shapes feel unsure, an archer's version of silence. Beck tells a brief tale of a warrior who only took certain shots and lived long enough to give away his bows. The moral arrives like a feather falling. Restraint is a kind of accuracy. When a slight ripple of cool air glides up from the river, the reeds tremble and settle. Hecanefer feels his breath mirror that, tremble and settle. The hollow, free of mirage, becomes a dependable friend, and he promises to remember its true face when the sun tries to make it smirk. The ridge speaks in more languages than words. An owl settles on a thorn branch, its round face a white coin in the half-dark. Tamek bows slightly. He hunts with silence, so we borrow his syllabus. They match their steps to the owl's habit. Move, freeze, listen, and find that pausing is not the enemy of progress, only its breath. A dung beetle rolls its treasure, an impossible task done slowly enough to become inevitable. Asha points and grins. Archery in miniature. The beetle's compass is the sky. Even its small eyes read the stars. Hecanefer feels a surge of kinship. Stars again, patiently telling everyone what time it is. Later, a slim fox ghosts along the ridge belly, smelling the news. Beck asks the group to read the fox's choices. Where it cuts below a rock to break its shape. Where it slows at softer sift. Where it angles into wind just enough to catch a whisper without announcing itself. The fox is a teacher who grades on presence, not performance. Hecanefer tries a sequence of moves learned from animals, an owl's halt, a beetle's persistence, a fox's angle. The string hums faintly when he finally releases, and the reed target answers with a tiny bow. Night creatures continue about their living, untroubled. That is the measure. They arrive while the sky is still a slate that remembers dreams. Dew has drawn faint silver lines where wind brushed and where small feet crossed. Morning is the accountant of night, Tamek says. Read the balance before it evaporates. Asha shows how dew thickens on the lee side of tiny stones, revealing wind direction like a whispered confession. She traces the swoop of a lark and the straight resolve of a lizard. Hekanafa kneels over his own prints from the previous night, softened by moisture, but still telling. Where he hesitated, where he remembered to keep below the skyline, where his cloak brushed too proudly. He smiles at the gentle correction and promises to sign his next steps with a lighter hand. Beck checks the bowbacks for dew sparkle, wiping them with a linen that smells faintly of lotus oil. Water is kind, he says, but glue likes dryness. They store the note as another reason for moon training. Cool nights and quick mornings protect their tools and write useful notes on the ground. By the time the sun peaks a single eyelash, the dew ledger fades, but the lesson remains. Night's story is legible for a moment if you greet it politely. On a hot day, the air writhes like a basket of snakes. At night, it sleeps. Tamek explains thermals with a palm held just above the sand, feeling for upward flickers. By moonlight, he says, the air behaves like a careful scribe. It doesn't add flourishes to your lines. Asher places 2 feathers on a stick at different heights. The higher trembles by day, the lower hardly at all. Tonight, both rest, and everyone's shoulders lower with them. They test arcs. Hekanafa looses at a gentle angle and listens to the smooth travel that makes no complaint. He tries the same shot when Beck stirs a small fire pit to mimic day's heat. The feather flags answer fussily, and the arrow wanders a finger's width. The difference is not dramatic, but it is persuasive in the way sleep is persuasive. Quiet, inevitable. Tamek frames the philosophy simply. We train when the air tells the truth. The ridge stores this motto alongside 100 small proofs. The tidy pot reeds, the barely audible string song, the way breath finds its place without negotiation. Hekanafa learns to trust night's fairness, and to carry that fairness into day like a secret he can use when the sun fusses. The night hears everything, so they make everything kinder. Asher brings a pouch of cloth pads and thin leather thongs. She wraps Tamek's copper amulet so it rests without tapping his sternum. He jokes that even wisdom should not knock. Sandals receive new palm fiber ties that do not creak. Cloak hems get a bead of clay dust to keep them from whispering against the legs. Beck shows how to line a quiver mouth with softened hide, so arrow knocks kiss instead of clack, and how a thin reed, split and bound, can keep shafts apart without complaint. Hekanafa learns the habit of pre-flight. Touch every place on his gear, where friction might turn into a syllable, blessing each with a simple fix. They practice a noise walk, crossing a shallow gravel patch after preparing, and then before, hearing the difference. The prepared crossing sounds like sleep, thinking of nothing. The unprepared sounds like a small parade. Tamek grins. Moonlight is a musician, he says. Bring tuned instruments. A rumour moves along the river. The moon will dim herself. Tamek calls it a gift, an uncommon practice in uncommon light. They climb the ridge early and wait as the moon's bright coin becomes a copper bowl. Shadows change their minds. The horizon grows thoughtful. When light stutters, Asher says, you must decide what stays true. They rehearse by touch and habit. Hekanafa uses his reed whistle for airflow, eyes closed, trust in breath and muscle memory. Beck hands around a handful of coarse salt to feel the breeze on palm skin. Grains that leap tell of gusts before faces do. The eclipse deepens. The ridge becomes a sketch of itself. The bell in the narrow pass seems to hold its own breath with them. Tamek asks for 3 shots only, each chosen, each with a reason. Hecanifer waits for a pause in the faint wind, counts his quiet heartbeats, and sends one arrow to comb a reed that he doesn't quite see but knows by where it should be. The reed answers with a soft rustle. Enough. When the moon releases her shadow and silver returns, no one cheers. They are busy discovering that their hands remembered what eyes forgot. Tamek's grin is small and proud. Now you know why we practice in many kinds of night, he says. The world will not always be simple. A train of camels appears on the river road, bells muffled, loads strapped with practiced kindness. The leader, a woman with eyes like old water, asks Tamek for a night escort past a stretch of rumour. We will be shadows beside your shadows, he says. The lesson turns practical. Moving with others who are not trained to move like water, they choose positions that keep them close enough to help, far enough not to startle beasts. Asher teaches the camel drivers a single hand sign, palm down, slow. That means hush and wait. Beck walks near the rear where repair is likely to be needed. He can retie, repad, rebalance anything that needs grace. Hecanifer discovers the diplomacy of pace, how to match steps with soft-footed animals, how to let the caravan's rhythm become the metronome, how to accommodate a pause without turning it into a question. They pass the rumoured stretch with nothing more dramatic than a jackal deciding they are too many to interest him. At the far side, the leader gifts dates and a scrap of indigo cloth. For your quiver, she says. Hecanifer ties it on, a little river of colour, against hippo-hide. Moon training teaches escort training, Tamek remarks. Kindness is a tactic. Some nights the river exhales a low mist that licks the ridge like milk poured thin. Asher smiles. This is a feathers test. Moisture can teach humility to flights that once felt certain. Tamek has them weigh their arrows by hand feel, then by behaviour. How does the string sing when damp air pads the notes? Beck opens a pouch of fine sand and dusts fletchings lightly, just enough to keep them from clinging. Hecanifer tries a shot and hears the difference, a softer hum, a slower return. He compensates with a breath that's longer at the settle, an angle a whisper higher. The reed tuft agrees with the thankful bow. They learn to wipe strings with oiled linen after each cluster of shots, to keep glue joints from sulking, to shelter quivers under cloaks when mist grows curious. Night is not one thing, Tamek says. We train in its flavours. When the mist thins, the ridge shows its usual smile, and the river's low song becomes audible again. Hecanifer logs the lesson beside others. Due ledger, thermal honesty, eclipse patience. A library of night is growing inside him. Word arrives that the Kandake will watch. No parade, only a quiet visit. Tamek arranges a lantern garden, 10 small lamps set at distances and angles that tell a story when seen together. We will not perform, he reminds them. We will practice with good manners. The Queen arrives with 2 attendants and the messenger Meroë, whose grin has found a home among them. She stands in the lee, no silhouette, a student of caution herself. Asher demonstrates the rope bell pass. Beck shows a bow's patient curve. Hecanifer, heart careful, combs reeds so their shadows nod politely in lamplight. The Kandake asks only one question. Why moonlight? Tamek gives the line he loves. Because we leave the night gentler than we found it. She inclines her head. Then leave this lamp brighter than you found it, she says. And Hecanifer steps forward, cups the little flame with his hand to shield it from the breeze, and lifts the wick just a breath. The lamp glows a fraction more. Everyone can feel the metaphor, sit down beside them, and get comfortable. They bow, not deep, but sincere, and return to practice as the queen and her small company slip away, like well-taught silhouettes. The lantern garden keeps burning, a set of stars borrowed near at hand. Wind can play dunes like a stringed instrument when grains align. Tamek calls them sand harps. On a particular slope, a faint humming begins, as the breeze freshens, lower than speech, higher than thought. Match this, he says, and the archers breathe to the dune's tone. Inhale on the rise, exhale on the fall. Asha places a feather tuft where the sound is strongest. It quivers like a plucked string. Hekanifa tests a release at the exhale's deepest point and finds the arrow's hum and June's hum briefly agree. It feels like nodding at a friend across a quiet room. Beck, curious, drags a flat board across the surface and shows how the pitch changes. Let the dune teach you tempo, Tamek advises. Not every night will sing, but every night has a rhythm. The lesson settles into their shoulders as a way to measure calm when no clock is handy. They leave without disturbing the slope further, a courtesy to an instrument that played for them. Hekanifa tucks the memory away with his other moon maps. At the ridge's edge, a stand of young palms throws shadows like long, narrow sails. Tamek sketches a triangle in the sand. Base, ground, height, trunk, hypotenuse, shadow. This is a trigon of kindness, he says. It tells you how far to stand so you remain Aruma. Asha measures with a cord knotted at hand lengths. They practice stepping into and out of shade as time moves, learning to anticipate where the shadow will be when a breath later becomes now. Hekanifa discovers how to loose from the shadow's edge, letting the arrow emerge from coolness the way a story emerges from a pause. Beck places a faint chalk line where the shadow will fall moments hence. Tamek has them aim not for the present read, but for the place it will be by the time an arrow crosses. Moonlight makes mathematicians of them without fright. The geometry feels like courtesy to time. Down near a shallow inlet, reeds gossip softly. Tamek names it a choir, constant enough to hide small mistakes, soft enough to soothe. Some nights, he says, you borrow other sounds. They practice stringing and unstringing bows, timing clicks with reed rustle, releasing when a small breeze lifts the choir's volume a hand width. Asha shows how to read ripples moving through reed ankles. A cross current can tell of a hidden inlet or a slow fish. Beck fixes a reed flute that a child left in the mud, coaxing a gentler tone from it, and sets it back on a rock where someone will find it at dawn. Hekanifa makes 3 shots, each layered under reed song, and notices that his heart, too, prefers to beat where music lives. They finish by standing still and listening until an egret lifts, stepping across air. Cover is kindness, Tamek concludes. Use the choir when you must speak softly. Not every message deserves a drum. A finger in sand can speak and then be erased. Tamek teaches sand letters, simple shapes drawn where a companion will find them. A crescent for water, 3 dots for caution, a small spiral for weight. Asha shows how to place them below a stone lip, so wind rubs them out by morning. Hekanifa draws a neat crescent near the dew hollow, then hides it with a palm frond that a friend will lift later. Beck contributes a mark that means repair needed, 2 short lines like a broken reed. They walk a loop and test themselves. Can they see messages without announcing to the skyline? Can they leave replies that won't scold daylight? Night is a generous co-author. The marks sit politely and then fade as wind polishes the slope. Moon training is also message training, Tamek says. Speak softly. Let sand finish the sentence. Training ends not with a shout, but with a shrug the bow can understand. Tamek demonstrates the unstringing ritual, carefully relieving the limbs so the bow can sleep without dreaming itself into a curve. Asha wipes down the back and belly with a breath of oil, barely enough to shine like a moon on water. Beck checks knocks for hairline sulks and offers small threads where needed. Hekanifa learns a closing phrase whispered into the grip. Nothing mystical, just gratitude shaped as breath. Thank you for holding what I asked. It becomes a habit so natural he can't imagine not saying it. They store bows on a rack carved from tamarisk, each slot a familiar embrace. Quivers lean like tired friends. The ridge seems to nod. Lesson learned. End kindly. Begin kindly. Carry kindness in the middle like a spine. Spacing can shout or soothe. Under a quarter moon, shadows stretch into handy rulers. Tamek demonstrates how to count companions by silhouette. If your shadow touches the heel of the next archer, you are too close to be discreet. If there's a palm's width of sand between, you're in the sweet distance. Asha marks a few lengths with reed sticks so they can calibrate for different moons. Hekanifa learns to keep his mind on the group's shape rather than his own feet. The team becomes a long, low letter, written neatly across the ridge. Beck experiments with load spacing too, placing spare water skins where shadows will keep them cool, then stowing them without a clink. They walk the pass as a sentence made of careful spaces. When the bell sleeps through their crossing, they grin and keep their joy quiet for the bell's sake. Spacing has become music. Pauses mean as much as notes. Near an old path, rock faces hold faint petroglyphs. Boats, cattle, figures with bows curved like smiles. Tamek approaches as one approaches a sleeping elder. These are calendars too, he says. Asha shows how to angle lamplight so carvings rise softly from stone. Too much light makes them flat, too little makes them guesswork. Beck gently brushes sand from crevices with a reed. Hekanifa traces the air above a carved archer and recognizes the familiar curve of a composite bow. He feels company across time, a note tucked for him by hands that preferred silence. They do not touch, they read, they do not boast, they learn. The moon lends dimension without glare, a perfect archive light. Why moonlight? Tamek shrugs, happy, because even the old stories look rested under it. Tamek invites them to name the winds the way neighbors are named. North is camel's friend. River breeze is fish breath. Hot desert gust is furnace. And the odd storytelling swirl that arrives after midnight is simply tale. When tale comes, Asha grins. Feathers get opinionated. They practice in each's company when seasons allow. Tonight tale visits, turning reeds into gossip. Beck demonstrates a just embrace height, twist of string, to sweeten the bow's voice against fussy air. Hekanifa aims a shade lower and releases on Taylor's exhale rather than inhale. The reed tuft, surprised into good behavior, bows. They keep a little wind book in their heads, how each breeze tastes on the tongue, what it does to oil on the skin, how quickly footprints blur. Moonlight makes wind visible, Tamek says, not to the eyes, but to the mind that is not distracted. Asha has an idea, tiny clay bells stamped with copper star marks, each mark a different tone. Hung at varying heights along a training lane, they become a music lesson for stealth. If you touch a low star, you rushed your feet, she says. If a high star answers, your shoulders rose. Beck helps fire the bells, and their tones are delicate as sugar shells. Hakanifa walks the lane with eyes closed, learning the terrain by memory and the music by discipline. He passes once with no sound but wind. The second time, a faint ting answers, a shoulder complaint. He laughs softly and tries again, shoulders melting. Silence holds. Tamek approves the new tool. Teach your teachers, he says to Asha. Let them keep teaching after we sleep. They return to where chapter 1 began. Same ash-coloured ridge, same moon, older eyes. Tamek says nothing for a long time. The team arranges itself by habit. Shadow gaps measured, quivers padded, strings oiled, date pits in pockets more for memory than need. Asha sets a reed in the stubborn pot that never liked to cooperate. Beck nods at the forged stones, as if greeting old friends. Hakanifa breathes as the river breathes, notching without looking, turning without announcing, letting wind and star share the arithmetic. He looses once, twice, a third time, each arrow singing a note taught by dunes, owls, reeds and bells. The reed tufts incline as if to say yes, yes, yes. They carry the rope past the bell. It dreams on. They step into palm shadow just as it becomes useful, and out of it just as it grows clingy. They write a crescent in the sand where water will be wanted at dawn and trust wind to erase it later. The Kandake is nowhere visible, but everywhere felt in the tidiness of their poise. Tamek finally speaks. The ridge asked us a question months ago. Why moonlight? Tonight, you answered. They smile the kind of smile that doesn't need teeth. The night, pleased, lays a cool hand on each brow, and the river keeps breathing the long, forgiving breath it learned before anyone remembered to count. Food that lets the body whisper is different from food that makes it sing. Tamek arranges a small table of night rations, sorghum porridge cooled to a patient cream, dates split and pressed with sesame, salted fish shaved thin as a promise. Eat for steadiness, he says, not for telling stories. Asha stirs a clay cup of fenugreek and mint. The steam smells like a lullaby for mussels. Beck salts the fish with 2 fingers, smiling as if salt were an old friend who knows when to leave. Hakanifa learns a rhythm. 3 spoonfuls, 2 sips, 1 slow breath. He discovers that sweetness can be an instruction when taken in quiet, that dates teach the mouth to wait. They eat in a half circle facing the ridge, the moon turning their bowls silver. Meroë the messenger brings a pinch of coriander from the river market. Tamek pretends to scold him for extravagance, then sprinkles it anyway, a luxury measured like a blessing. They speak of foods that travel softly, flatbread that does not crack loudly, dried figs that can be chewed like thoughts, water carried in skin bags wrapped in damp cloth, so it stays modest. Hakanifa pockets a sesame date for later, and feels provision become confidence without boasting. When bowls are washed with a handful of warm sand and a whisper of water, the ground looks as if it has always been clean. Rations are manners, Tamek concludes. Feed the night gently, and the night will feed you back. A wadi can be a sudden mouth in the earth, silent now, loud after rains. Tamek teaches a crossing like threading a needle. He marks 3 entry points with tiny stone stacks and shows how to descend along the wadi's seam where silt packs tighter and sound dies willingly. Edges gossip, he says. Centers keep secrets. Asha demonstrates weight sharing. 1 hand to the wall, the other holding the bow so the string never scrapes stone. Beck lays a rope above as a courtesy. not a crutch, and dusts the cliff with sand to soften any loose grit. Hekanefa listens for pebbles that want to roll. He places his foot where their urge is smallest. At the lowest bend, moisture lingers, coolness against the palm like a small surprise. They pause, letting breath return to equal. Climbing the far side, they choose places where roots bite into earth, borrowing the root's belief in staying. The wadi accepts their passage and keeps sleeping. Back on the ridge, Tamek draws a quick map in sand. 3 safe gullets, 2 tricky ones, and a path that prefers moon to sun. You just learned a polite word in the language of gullies, he says. Use it often. On the ridge's far side, a low cliff waits with a voice like a jar turned sidewise. Tamek tosses a pebble and listens to the echo's time. Short for near, thick for far, smooth for open sand, ragged for brush. The cliff answers better at night, he says. Day's heat crowds its words. Asha sings 3 notes barely louder than thought. The cliff returns a hum that suggests distance and shape. Beck knocks the bow's limb with a nail, softly, and times the return to judge how wide the hollow runs. Hekanefa sends a blunt arrow to a reed tuft and hears the moment it leaves the bow, the small body of flight, the tuft's sigh, and the cliff's indifferent final word. An archer becomes a keeper of echoes, fitting them into a mental shelf labelled valley, shelf, and fan. They walk the base in silence, counting steps between echo changes. Tamek shows how to mark with breath. Inhale at smooth echo, exhale at rough, so the body remembers a map, even if hands are busy. Hekanefa repeats the loop with eyes half closed, and finds the cliff will guide him with sound alone. Let the world answer, Tamek murmurs, and try not to talk over it. The elders call a scatter of lights the leopard because it prowls near the river season after season. Asha tells the story as they sit with quivers leaned. A leopard that learned to step so quietly, even fish forgot to fear. When the leopard stands over the tamarisk, she says pointing, wind will be lazy. When it crouches low, expect tail to visit. Tamek invites a practice of courage without noise. Each archer must stand up, walk to a marked reed, and return, while the leopard guards his back. No hurry, no hush too dramatic, only the steadiness a hunter star admires. Hekanefa rises when the leopard's front paw touches the tamarisk tip. The air inside him grows as wide as the river, yet moves like a stream under ice. Slow, sure. Beck chips a tiny leopard rosette onto a practice token and hands it around. A simple badge for knights when someone meets difficulty with unannounced courage. No speeches, just a token resting in a palm. The leopard keeps watching, the ridge keeps accepting footsteps that don't ask for applause. Not far upriver, a salt pan gleams like frozen moonlight even when the night is dark. Tamek teaches the etiquette of crossing a mirror. Step where crystals are bright and stiff, he says, not where brine makes them tear. Asha wets her finger and touches her ear to sample air. The faint lick of salt means the pan is awake, but well-mannered. Beck wraps sandal soles with a band of soft leather to keep the crunch from complaining. Hekanefa learns to place weight directly down rather than rolling through, a posture that makes him feel like a reed planted by deliberate hands. The pan whispers approval. No cracks, no sighs, only the sound of moon thinking. At midpoint, they stop to learn the pan's gift. The sky underfoot doubles the stars, turning timing drills into a gentle theatre. Hekanefa aligns his release with a star and its twin, feeling balance as a quiet companion. When they reach the far shore, Tamek looks back. Their path is invisible. Crossing without writing, he says, is sometimes the kindest letter. Under a tamarisk, the wind likes. Usher unrolls papyrus and grinds lamp black with a drop of oil. Ink should move like a calm river, she says, handing Hekanifer a reed pen. They write to those who sleep far away, small, respectful lines about practice and the kindness of moons. Tamek recommends avoiding heroics in letters. Tell them we are well, he smiles, and that your hands are learning to be gentle. Beck seals each with a dab of warm resin, pressing a simple stamp, a reed and a bow, so the courier will know where to return replies. The act of writing changes the night. Breaths lengthen, shoulders ease, quiet grows honest. Hekanifer leaves space for a single line his mother will add, as she always does. Drink water before you think. Meroë promises to carry the letters in a pouch that never jangles. He tucks them against his chest as if they could keep his heart polite. This is also training, Tamek says. Belonging without noise. They borrow 2 reed boats from fishers who like how archers fix nets between lessons. Water is a second sky, Tamek says, stepping in so gently the boat hardly remembers he arrived. Asher teaches the paddles whisper. Blade slides in on the exhale, lifts on the inhale, dripping only enough to count as a blessing. Hekanifer kneels low, bow canted so the string kisses no spray. He learns the river's grammar, current as sentence, eddies as commas, reads as quotation marks. Beck sets a floating ring of palm fibre, a moving target that goes nowhere in a hurry. Hekanifer times his shot not to the ring but to the paddle rhythm, releasing as Asher's blade leaves the water. The arrow pierces the ring and rests in the river as if admiring its own reflection. They practice retrieving without splash, tiptoeing the boat against current, making the hull a shadow that refuses to argue with the night. By the time the reed boats nose back to shore, everyone smells of river and ease. Moon on water, Tamek murmurs, is a lesson with 2 teachers. On the ridge, Asher anchors a slender reed circle to a line that runs between 2 stakes. The night wind becomes tutor, pulling the circle in a slow, wandering pattern. Shoot only when its laziness matches yours, Tamek suggests, amused. Hekanifer first chases the circle and learns it dislikes pursuit. His arrow is always a heartbeat behind. He waits, lets the circle swing out and lose interest in moving, and releases as it sighs through center. The shaft passes so cleanly the circle looks pleased with the idea of having been pierced. Beck tightens or loosens the line to give the wind a different mood. Some nights fussy, some almost asleep. They make a game of not competing. Whose arrow can pass most politely? Whose can slip through twice in one breath space when the circle returns? Laughter is low and kind. Moving targets, Tamek says, are really moving selves. Befriend the one that pauses. Meroë the healer visits carrying a basket that smells like a secret garden. Myrrh resin, sesame oil, crushed mint, and a twist of frankincense. Training loves repair, she says, kneeling beside Hekanifer. She warms oil between her palms and teaches a slow spiral along the forearm, following the lines that strings and breath have drawn. The motion is so gentle, it could be mistaken for thinking. Asher learns to make a paste of ground fenugreek and river clay for tired knees. Beck, skeptical at first, relaxes under a thumb that finds a sore place. and convinces it to become a story instead of a complaint. Tamek listens as Meroë describes sleep postures, on the side with a rolled cloak under the top arm, so the ribs keep their conversation quiet. Hekanifer smells like sesame and peace. The ridge feels consulted rather than used. Why moonlight? Meroë smiles, because it remembers to ask the body nicely. The furnace wind arrives one evening with sand like soft grain. No danger, only insistence. Tamek treats it as another teacher. Build a windbreak that doesn't argue, he instructs. Asher plants palm fronds at an angle, letting air slip rather than fight. Beck drapes a wet cloth where dust most wants to gossip. It quiets. Hekanifer learns to string and unstring in this mood. Bow turning away from grit, arrows sleeping in quiver mouths wrapped with linen. They practice low releases into the lee of the break, finding that even fussing air can be lured into good behavior by politeness. Meroë wets cloths and lays them on necks, reminding the group to drink before they feel like storytellers. When the wind calms, the ground shows they left it better. Fronds gathered, cloth rinsed, sand smoothed. Respect noisy nights, Tamek says. They tell the calm ones you're listening. The Kandak sends a basket with a note, compete without noise. Inside, 3 polished stones, each with a faint rosette like the leopard spots. Tamek devises a contest in 3 rooms of the night: reed circle, rope and bell pass, and clay pot choir. Scores are whispers, tallied in date pits flipped smooth side up for grace, rough side up for try again. Asher judges posture and kindness to targets. Beck judges repairs made promptly. Meroë awards a bonus pit for water offered unasked. Hekanifer focuses on dilation rather than conquest. Can he make his breath so wide it contains nerves? He combs a reed, carries the rope with a smile the bell cannot hear, and leaves pots more comfortable than he found them. At the end, the stones go not to the highest count, but to the best manners in 3 hidden categories: patience, attention, and repair. Hekanifer receives one, Asher quietly takes another, and a shy younger archer receives the 3rd for a perfect, silent reset of a wobbling target. Laughter is low, joy is tall. Asher tells an origin tale as feathers dry on cords. Once, she says, the ostrich laughed at the wind for being invisible. The wind answered by teaching its shape to feathers, so archers could see it. In gratitude, Asher grins, we bind the wind back to itself with sinew. Tamek encourages the tale into practice. Hekanifer holds 2 different feathers, one rigid, one forgiving, and tests them in a courtyard breeze Asher makes with a woven fan. He feels the laughter in the forgiving one. It bends, remembers, returns. Beck adds a historical note. Long ago, someone tried palm leaves. They bragged and then broke. Feathers only chuckled and kept working. The night becomes a listening room for a soft mythology that invites tools to be teachers and teachers to be amused. Hekanifer ties 3 new fletchings with reverence and a private smile for the ostrich, who taught wind to appear. Along an old path, stones the size of sleeping dogs mark an understood line. No gates, just courtesy. Tamek teaches how to approach border stones, below skyline, palms open, quivers tied so knocks don't chatter. Asher places a small reed token on a stone, 3 knots meaning passing by with goodwill. Beck straightens a fallen marker, as if setting a cup back on a tray. Hekanifer learns greetings that travel quietly. The pause that says we see you. The bow that belongs to neighbors rather than kings. Meroë explains how messengers read these signs at dawn, how one knot can save a conversation from becoming a misunderstanding. They camp on their side of the stones, lamplight low, music none. The border feels like a shared decision rather than a line. Moonlight has bright eyes, Tamek says. Let it witness good manners. On certain nights, a quiet market blooms near the river like a cautious flower. Sellers lay goods on mats, feathers bundled with care, acacia resin in amber lumps, sinew cords coiled like small moons. Voices are low by custom. Bargaining is done with eyebrows, palms and pauses. Tamek lets the students do the buying to learn the etiquette of value. Asher tests feathers by their hum in a pocket breeze. Beck warms resin with his hand to scent its honesty. Hekanefer trades a polished shell for a handful of fletchings and a story about where the ostrich danced last season. Meroë swaps a spare pouch stitch for a corn cake and carries a loaf to Meroë. No one leaves with everything. Everyone leaves with enough. The market folds itself before midnight. Mats lifted, prints brushed. The ridge is richer by a few good bundles and a memory of community that never needed to raise its voice. The river swells, bringing silt that tastes of far countries. For the flood's first night, lanterns ride low on reed boats, a necklace of fire along the current. The Kandake invites archers to keep company with the flame. Guard the quiet, Meroë translates. Tamek smiles. An assignment the ridge understands. Asher teaches lantern spacing so reflections don't quarrel. Beck checks each wick and float, adding a breath of oil where needed. Hekanefer walks the bank, bow unstrung, counting with heartbeats the distance between fires, pleased when the river makes them nod as if in agreement. Children watch from a safe bend. Meroë gives them mint to chew so the night tastes fresh. When a breeze tries to turn two lanterns into a crowd, Hekanefer steps in, cups one against the wind, and sets it free again. The lantern keeps its place. The flood hums. We light the river, Tamek says softly, so it remembers we are grateful. Tamek begins a call and response map. From the tamarisk with 3 arms, he calls. To the dune that hums, the group answers. Past the fox's hesitation, toward the cliff that listens. Each landmark carries a story, so the path becomes a poem. Asher threads beads on a cord, one for each line, so hands can follow what voices know. Hekanefer takes a turn leading. He stumbles at first, then finds the poem's river. Beck adds a verse about a fault in the wadi that smells faintly of wet clay after dusk. Meroë contributes, the stone that warms oil well, and the group laughs, happy for a healer's map point. They walk the poem by night, stepping on cadence, turning where words turn. The ridge approves of such maps, portable, light, unlikely to betray. You can lose a scroll, Tamek says, but a song walks with you. Tamek steps back. Teach, he says to Hekanefer, and the night tilts a little. Hekanefer chooses the tethered circle and the rope and bell pass. Less about aim, more about listening. He borrows Tamek's phrases but makes them his. Wait for the circle to lose interest in being a circle. He smiles, and the group grins at the new poetry. A younger archer named Jeho listens hard. He rushes, rings the bell once, and looks ashamed. Hekanefer kneels beside him. The bell heard you care, he whispers. Let it hear you breathe. On the next pass, the rope floats and the bell dreams. Asher nods to herself. Teaching has made Hekanefer's shoulders older in a good way. Beck slips Hekanefer the Rosette Stone from the contest as a secret award for patience in instruction. Hekanefer tucks it in his belt and keeps teaching. By the end, he is tired the way a river is tired, satisfied and heading somewhere. Some assignments are a promise to pay attention. The ridge needs no drama, only eyes and ears that won't tire. Tamek divides the night into watches that overlap like fish scales. No one is alone with the dark. Asher teaches a vigil posture that saves knees and keeps breath long. Beck sets a pot of barley drink near the lee so wakefulness can sip without slurping. Hekanefer spends 2 hours naming winds and counting distant oars. He sees a line of torches far down river and does nothing because doing nothing is the job. He writes a crescent under a stone to mark dew and lifts it later to confirm the river's breath. When he wakes Jeho, he does it with a hand on the shoulder and the river's rhythm in his whisper. Dawn finds them unheroic and perfect. No alarms, no lost hours, only a ledger of attention neatly kept. Vigil, Tamek says, is practice without arrows. The training season turns its last page. Tamek asks each to leave a repair. Asher smooths a path that had grown petty with pebbles. Beck tightens the lashings on the bow rack. Meroë plants small bundle of herbs where shade lingers, a gift to future aches. Hekanefer finds the stubborn pot and mends its hairline with resin and patience, then sets it where wind can tell it jokes. They write a final sand letter, a spiral that means thank you, drawn under a stone lip so wind will carry it away kindly. Meroë brings a strip of cloth marked with the Kandake's seal and ties it to a tamarisk branch, small, colour mild, a nod rather than a banner. Gear goes into baskets with less fuss than it emerged. The ridge looks like itself, unburdened by guests who knew how to visit. Return when the moon asks, Tamek says, which is to say, whenever you can listen. They return one final time, not to drill, but to listen to what has gathered. The ridge breathes with the river. The moon is the same and different, as moons always are. Tamek invites each to speak a sentence beginning with, because. Asher says, because feathers know their shape best at night. Beck says, because glue and iron keep better promises in cool air. Meroë offers, because bodies learn to be asked, not told. Meroë adds, because messages travel farther when they are light. Jeho, shy but brave, says, because the bell sleeps. Hekanefer waits. When he finally speaks, his voice is a thread sturdy enough to sew leather. Because by moonlight we become the kind of people our arrows think we are. Slow in our choosing, gentle in our doing, accurate in our listening. The group hears their season in that sentence. It is not grand, and it is everything. They unstring bows one more time. They wrap amulets, dust cloak hems, fold quivers to rest. The river says the same long line it has said since the first archer guessed at a curve. The dunes hold their breath and then release it slowly. The owl writes one last word on the night and flies. Before they turn downhill, Tamek places a date pit on a flat stone. It is no offering, only a friend left to count the stars as they walk away. The moon slips a fingertip along each shoulder like a parent checking blankets, and the ridge keeps their footprints for a moment before the wind tidies them, as planned. Why moonlight? Tamek asks for the last time, smiling. The answer is already in their backs, in the way they step, in the way they do not disturb a single reed as they pass. The answer is that night, properly welcomed, teaches gentleness, that does not sleep when the sun returns. And so they go, quiet, ready, accurate friends of the silver hour, leaving the desert ridges exactly as they wish to find them, patient, unmarred, and softly wise.